Hello and welcome back to Carrying On, my own personal take on collecting records and listening to music here in Thailand. My name is Julian, and today I want to talk about actually a record which I don't have on vinyl. Normally, I talk about records that I have in my own collection, but today I want to talk about a record that I've been streaming and listening to a lot over the last 6 months, and it's really become I think one of my all-time favorite records. Certainly one of my favorite jazz records, and certainly one of my favorite jazz piano records. It's such a diverse record, such an interesting record, and I've just played it to death really over the last 6 months. It's a record which came out actually in the middle of last year in 2025, but I kind of slept on it. I didn't really listen to it at all. I didn't actually at all until January this year. I put it on for some reason on Spotify and was just blown away by this record by Brad Mehldau, Ride into the Sun. Beautiful cover as well. I really like the colors and really get a sense of the sun there and the heat of the sun on this album cover. Brad Mehldau, Ride into the Sun. Now, yeah, Brad Mehldau is well known as probably the best well known Gen X, I guess, if we're talking about generations, Gen X jazz pianist, born in 1970. So just 3 years older than me. So that makes him 55 now. And he came to prominence in the early 90s when he was a student himself, I think, in New York. And he met Joshua Redman and he became part of his early 90s band. And had some issues apparently. Had a drug problem actually, which I didn't realize until recently in the 90s. But he started making records which made waves, and he was critically acclaimed. The Art of the Trio albums series started in the mid 90s, where he was kind of covering classic songs in a trio, um, in a jazz trio. But once he got over those drug issues, I think he moved to Los Angeles and he hooked up with a bunch of budding singer-songwriters at a club called Largo in uh, in Los Angeles, there was a night particularly run by John Bryan, the quite well-known songwriter and producer now, who was putting together these up-and-coming, lesser-known singer-songwriters like Rufus Wainwright, Amy Mann, Fiona Apple, and one Elliott Smith, who was a rising singer-songwriter, American singer-songwriter of the time, very introspective lyrically, but always had interesting tunes. And for Brad Mehldau, what he particularly liked were his harmonies. But I think he also really related to him as an artist and the angst-ridden life he had really, he's suffering with depression and mental health issues, Elliott Smith, ending up with his parents' suicide in 2003, which was quite a gruesome death with his girlfriend at the time present. So a very tragic end to Elliott Smith's life. But he left behind an interesting body of music for anyone interested in acoustic guitar and alternative indie rock. You've got to listen to his back catalogue. And so you might seem an unlikely partner for Brad Mehldau, who was doing jazz trio standard albums at the time, but he always had an interest in rock music, and he'd started covering songs by Radiohead and Soundgarden and Nirvana, and he put them into his sets or into his albums. So he started to get a bit of that kind of 90s alternative crowd they might know a few Brad Meldau tunes because of his cover versions. So he'd always had an interest in rock music. That is the very interesting thing with this album in particular. I think that you really see the eclectic styles that he can include on an album. And I really think this album, Ride into the Sun, is a masterpiece, to be honest, from start to finish. I mean, it's not short, it's long. It's an hour and 12 minutes long. But there is not a boring moment on this record. It is packed full of ideas and music and introspection and moments of great clarity and beauty. Just, I just think this is a brilliant record. So this record, it is basically, I should say, a tribute to Elliott Smith using his songs. So most of the songs here, there are 16 songs on here, and I think 11 of them are just covers of his songs done in very interesting and different ways. And four of them are kind of, reinterpretations or inspired by Elliott Smith, let's say, four songs. And there's also a cover of Nick Drake's Sunday, which is beautiful. And in some ways, the most kind of standard cover is actually very similar to the actual song on Brighter Later, Sunday. Beautiful instrumental by Nick Drake. And it's a beautiful instrumental here. But in some ways, it's not the most interesting thing on the record. It's really the Elliott Smith songs here, starting with Better Be Quiet Now, which is just a beautiful, I think, a kind of breakup song by Elliott Smith. But this is it's a wonderfully beautiful, subdued start to the album, and then suddenly comes into life with a full orchestra. And that shows the way on what's going to happen on this record. You have the solo piano parts, which are beautifully done by Brad Mehldau, but you have orchestras and you have a kind of a classical influence on this record through the orchestra. But there is also a kind of a rock influence going through this record, through the rhythm section, through the bass and the drums, and the way they're played. And they're not played in a traditional jazz way. They're played with some quite rock style drums and bass, a real thumping bass that comes in sometimes. It's like, oh yeah. And this is not a genteel jazz record. If you turn this up, this is a wonderfully dynamic, bass heavy album that really, rings a lot of bells in different areas. You've got jazz, you've got rock, you've got orchestral, with one or two almost kind of baroque elements in track two, Everything Means Nothing to Me, which is a highlight, actually, I think, of the record. It's absolutely brilliant the way this track builds. And then it includes a bassoon, a beautiful bassoon playing on this, which gives it that kind of baroque classical feel with this kind of much more rocky uh, rhythm section and Brad's beautiful lyrical piano, which goes throughout this record, of course. And then on track three, we get to one of the highlights. I mean, it's kind of endless highlights, this record, but there are three vocal tracks on this album, which are all kind of highlights because they stick out as vocal tracks, but wow, they are really good. And Tomorrow, featuring Daniel Rossen from Grizzly Bear, an American indie band. Wow, I don't know much about this guy, but wow, he does a fantastic version of this song. And yeah, I mean, Elliott Smith is compared to Nick Drake, sometimes at least in his in his kind of doom-laden kind of lyrics at times. Musically, yeah, maybe not. He doesn't expand in the way that Nick Drake does into that kind of jazzy areas. But yeah, the influences are there. Let's put it that way. He's influenced by Nick Drake, and this is so beautifully arranged. It's a bit like that kind of mid-period Nick Drake, like Brighter Later, where he's adding in, different instrumentation and becoming more and more jazzy. Because this, of course, is far more jazzy as an interpretation of Tomorrow. Beautifully sung, and the guitar playing is beautiful by Daniel Rossen. He really nails it, and it's a beautiful lyric. There's a kind of optimism there about looking forward to tomorrow, but is it a kind of doom laden optimism that But yeah, it's beautiful anyway, and it's a highlight, I think, of the album. It goes on. Sweet Adeline is followed by Sweet Adeline Fantasy, and it's just Sweet Adeline is very beautiful, just piano solo, beautiful melody, which Brad picks up from Elliott Smith's tunes and just interprets it brilliantly. And then the fantasy one is where he just goes off on his own a little bit and just uses it as a springboard. Very beautiful. And then he goes into maybe Elliott Smith's most famous song, and lyrically, I have to say, brilliant. Between the Bars, which is really all about the the prison that is alcohol. For some people, it becomes a prison, and they're locked behind them. And between the bars, it's such a brilliant kind of metaphor he's using here as a kind of abusive, relationship. And you might think on first listen, it's a love song, but actually, it's a brilliant metaphor for alcohol. And it's a obviously we don't get the lyrics here. This is just Brad playing, but a beautiful interpretation and shows the melodic brilliance of Elliott Smith in this tune. It goes on then to The White Lady Loves You More, another brilliant early Elliott Smith song, which is, yeah, brilliantly done again. And then I feel we're kind of starting side B. Of course, this is just, it's not really streaming, but I kind of mentally thought, okay, this starts side B when it goes into Ride in the Sun Part 1, which is not an Elliott Smith song. It's an interpretation. It's a kind of inspired by song by Brad Mehldau, and it's great. And it leads into Big Star's 13. So you might be thinking, why? What is Big Star doing here? Well, it was because Elliott Smith covered this song as well. Excuse me, 13, which is a great Big Star song. I was playing it again yesterday just to get the hook of the melody and how Brad Mehldau used it. But it's a beautiful uh, melodic, again, piano ballad, really, that Brad plays here, 13. And then we go into another highlight, actually. Everybody cares, everybody understands. This really takes off with the rhythm section again in this one. It really has really some real verve and power to this instrumental. And the next one, Somebody Cares, Somebody Understands, is Brad Mehldau going off on a little flight of fancy going on from this. It's beautiful. Then there's Satellite, which is a nice little interlude with some nice little beats interplaying with Brad's piano. And then another absolute highlight, I think, Color Bars featuring Chris Teal. And he's playing the mandolin and singing. And yeah, this is an absolute stunning highlight, I think. Um, um, oh yeah, there's also yes. Well, okay, let's do this one. Yes, so Chris Teal's Color Bars, a great, a great vocal tune, and it's just lovely the way the interplay of the mandolin and the piano on this one. And there is actually, I just missed out the other Daniel Rossen vocal tune, Southern Belle, which is a really, again, energetic kind of bluegrassy kind of influenced vocal tune as well, which is actually just before Satellite. So it goes, and that's wonderful as well. All three vocal tracks are really great. So after that, we're about an hour in now, and the last two tunes are Sunday, which I mentioned before, the Nick Drake cover, which is great. It's great to hear that in a really great production, actually. It's wonderfully done. And then Ride into the Sun, the conclusion, the final track on the album is it just builds beautifully. It's about 9.5 minutes long, I think. And I just checked actually, and about at 5 minutes 58, it suddenly springs into life with the bass and the drums and the orchestra all suddenly come alive on this tune, which has been slow burning, and for the first 5 minutes and 58 seconds, and then suddenly it springs into life for this wonderful crescendo of a conclusion to the album, which is Ride into the Sun, which he said himself, Brad, when asked why he chose that as the album name, which is taken from Color Bars. It's one of the lines in the song. I'm gonna ride into the sun, and he says that yeah, he kind of sees this as a connection to Elliott Smith. That's a spiritual thing, maybe, that as we listen to this music, we're still riding with Elliott Smith. He's still there. He's still with him. He feels as he plays and listens to this music. We're riding into the sun together. So a kind of a spiritual thing, maybe you could see it as a kind of, a feeling of annihilation, kind of, riding into the heat of the sun, but also that kind of uplifting feeling of, yeah, Elliott Smith is gone. He left us 23 years ago, but the spirit and the feeling in his songs and his melodies, and for Brad Mehldau in his harmonies in particular, which he picked up on. Elliott Smith's still here, still with us, still riding into the sun. So that is my review of Brad Mehldau's "Riding to the Sun." Have you heard this album? It did have some great reviews actually at the time, mainly in the jazz press, though, within its field. But and then life goes on, and people never talk about it again, and I'm left thinking, oh, am I the only one who thinks this is one of the greatest jazz, like modern jazz albums ever made? This is absolutely brilliant, breathtaking at times, punch the air kind of crescendos mixed with, absolutely, absolutely beautiful melodies. And I just think this is one of the great, you know, accessible, I guess, jazz piano albums of all time. I can't think of a better one that I would recommend to someone who to introduce them to the jazz piano, because it's so there are so many great melodies. There's so many different styles put into this melting pot. I think it's a wonderful record, and I'm spreading the word today. And I'd love to know what you think. Have you heard this? If you do watch this and go away and have a listen to it, what do you think? Because I think it's a modern classic. Okay, well, that's it from me today. Slightly different one today, going on a Spotify record. But hey, music is music, and as Mazzy might say, it's the music, stupid. It's not about the format. Well, thanks for listening. Leave your comments below, but maybe let me know what's your favorite, jazz piano album of all time. What would you recommend to someone who maybe wasn't so into jazz as a record? Because this one might be mine. What would you recommend? What are your favorite jazz piano records in this vein? I'd love to hear from you below. That's it from me today. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll be back again soon to carry on about some more records. Until then, bye bye, and I'll see you next time.